conference. My name is Achim Schwarzwälder and I'm from Space Cargo Unlimited. I will give you a little bit more on this a little bit later during the discussion in the roundtable. As you know, yesterday there have been the presentations. Right after we have a Q&A in the roundtable. Please keep your questions for this roundtable show at the end. Talking about our first speaker has a long career in the financial service industry for, let's say, a period of about 20 years and spent about 14 years with HSBC Bank as financial consultant. He was also an independent financial advisor at Origin Financial Services. And he moved to Cartledge Maudland as a wealth manager. Now he's running his own practice, and we are super excited to have him here. Actually, I cannot see him here. So Markus Blase should be the first, right?
Yes, he is. Yeah, I know where he is.
Yeah, it would be good. If we have him. Check, that would never happen with you, you know? No. That's always the same. Things like this happen to me, yeah? So please give a very warm welcome to Markus Blase. I'm already through the laudatio, so I have to keep it up. Thank you.
Good morning. For the record, it's Markus Blase, B-L-A-S-E, not Blase. Yeah, but that is fine. German, yeah. That is fine. So good morning to day two. I hope you all enjoyed the first day of Asgardia's Space Science and Investment Conference. Yesterday, we covered areas like artificial gravity, the effect of space environment on reproduction, missions planned for human conception and childbirth in space, life cycles in space, and of course, there was the presentation of posters, which was in the adjoining room, which many people had spent a tremendous amount of time researching, compiling, and submitting. And I hope that a lot of you took the opportunity of having a look at them. They are still there today. So, Evolution Space Projects. Mark Bogert, who follows me next, will cover venture investment into space tech, which is an area that investors can participate in early stage seed investing whilst product development takes place. Yesterday, I had a long meeting with Dr. Igor Ashabeli to discuss his vision on how Asgardia will raise finance and the development of the Asgardia brand over the next 10 years. Our aim is to make enough money and income over the short, medium, and long term to enable the project to move to space. Secondly, to create value through capital accumulation. This is a huge area of development, as we need to create strong corporate governance in order to attract corporate finance, guarantee its security and its distribution through the various channels within Asgardia. So what are we going to do with the money? How is it distributed? Who needs it? And over what timescale? Dr. Igor Ashabeli and Asgardia have a clear model on how they plan to raise finance through residents, citizens, and mega investors over the next decade. The new digital currency, the Sonar, will be launched and then traded. And Asgardian citizens, as well as others, can invest funds into the Asgardian economy by purchasing Asgardian Financial Arcs, or AFA shares. Needless to say that in the world of technology and high-tech investments, the market for investors has been the place that you would have wanted to be and participate in for the last 10 to 20 years. Looking forwards, I see this sector growing enormously through the rapid rise and pace of development in technology that is currently taking place throughout the world. High-tech investments, aerospace, software, and hardware have seen significant growth over the last decade and will continue to do so globally in the future. Individual shares and funds like unit trusts, bonds on both sides of the Atlantic offer investors the opportunity to participate in these sectors. And it is here that scientists can go to professional organizations for advice and also ways of raising finance in order to further develop their products. In the UK, they can look at business angels, for example, and then there's European Business Angels Agency that they can go to for advice and for loans and for capital raising. The majority of tech and space-related funds have outperformed most asset classes, like corporate bonds, property funds, UK, US, European funds, equities, over the last 5 to 10 years. This will help so we will need to create a culture whereby we can sustain the economy at a surplus. This will help us work with the scientists that can bring value to our brand. Our brand will need to be globally recognizable in 10 years. So one of our aims is that when you look at the multinational companies throughout the world, they are instantly recognizable. And that has to be one of our medium and long-term objectives. We will need to liaise and work with the likes of universities on projects to assist them with the ongoing development of the projects. We will need to reach out to students and space agencies to keep abreast of development. The overall aim is to assist Asgardia reach further in space exploration. Evolution Space Projects is designed to discuss corporate fundraising with multinational corporations to enable us to operate in the next 1, 3, and 5 years, to enable Asgardia to operate globally. The Asgardia model of raising money over the next decade will meet a lot of the financial requirements, but we also need to raise money from corporate associations and sponsorship in this early stage of our own seed investment proposition. So we will need to raise awareness with the multinational companies. We will need to raise awareness with the universities to ensure that they understand what our objectives clearly are. From meetings and discussions with Lena yesterday, we need to build interdisciplinary bridges within Asgardia so that our international banking is set up and that we have strong corporate governance over the management of the money that is being raised. We will need to bring work and finance from all of the continents under a strict, well-managed regulatory control. We will want to have some of the leading global companies offering not only financial support, but also being part of the next most exciting global expedition. This will give them the opportunity to be part of the house. So, are you all in, have one of these? So if you look at page 18, on page 17, sorry. 17 and 18. So in the terrestrial representations, which are in here for explanation. So this will give you an explanation of the continental, subcontinental, and country levels. So in our meeting with Igor yesterday, we discussed in depth the representative office, the terrestrial representations, Earth finance and investment. So please spend some time having a look through this. Work will take place to create our story so that meetings can take place with these large organizations that can bring our proposition to the table. This is currently in place and will continue for the rest of this year and throughout next year. Lastly, we will look to assist scientists in their quest for research and development. Investors are often looking for a simple solution of achieving growth on their money over the medium and long term. Mark will cover this area in more detail, but we'll have to create a system of how to monitor this. As I have previously mentioned, Asgardia will be looking for 6 mega investors who will come from each of the 6 continents. Yesterday, we discussed this area in more detail, and we will be completing further work as time goes on to develop this strategy. So we have a mandate that we have to respond to Igor by the next Parliament meeting in Estonia in November. So we've got specific timeframes that we're going to be working towards. There is a timeline for us to seek the mega investors, but the work starts now. Raising finance and building a financially secure environment will take huge amounts of planning and work, all of which are underway. The digital sonar will be the currency. However, this is some way off being launched. So seeking funding and the ability to complete the transactions now is of paramount importance. We had a further meeting with Ben yesterday to discuss finance, banking, and pulling all of these 6 continents together. I firmly believe that we are in an exciting period of growth in global technology and aerospace advancement. America, Europe, and Asia have very active and buoyant markets, with development gathering momentum year on year. There is no reason why the next decade is not more exciting than the last one in terms of technical advancements. In simple terms, look at the development of your smartphone and your smartwatch. Where will we be in the next 10 years at the end of the next decade? What will be the latest technological advancement that we are all using on a day-to-day basis? And what giant steps will Asgardia have taken over that period of time? Many thanks for your attention, and I will now hand you over to Mark Bogert.
Really very fast. I think we'll have a very long coffee at the end. So next speaker is the Managing Director of Seraphim Capital, which is a venture capital fund based in London, and he's the director of the investment group UK Space Tech Angels. He's also chairman of the London Co-Investment Fund, and as well as the member of the Venture Capital Committee BVCA. So please welcome very warm Mark Bogert.
So good morning, everyone. It's a privilege to be here with a number of living legends in the room. So thank you to the organisers for inviting me along. So as per the introduction, I'm a venture capitalist, so my focus is on making money. And we are currently the only venture fund globally thematically focused on the space tech sector. So I'm going to take a few minutes to talk to you about what's changed in the market and why these opportunities are now available to non-government investors. I'm going to talk a little bit about Seraphim and the type of things that we've been doing and what we've been investing into. And then I'm going to talk about Asgardia and the type of investments that are required in order to achieve some of the objectives of this community. So without further ado, I'm going to go straight into this, talking about some of the big trends that have happened in space over recent years. So the first of these 3 big trends is displayed here. So the size and cost and weight of satellites has been falling dramatically. Now, why has this happened? Well, there's a number of reasons why this has happened, but principally the smartphone and the effort and engineering that has gone into developing these powerful mini computers, the components of that have been finding their way into different industries. And the space industry is one of the industries that those components have found their way into. So what's occurred is that entrepreneurs can now create satellites that are smaller but capable. So satellites that would have once cost $1 billion or hundreds of $1 million, you can now get much of that functionality in satellites that cost a fraction of that. So why is this happening? So the companies that build those hundreds of millions of dollars satellites, they're not able to be able to suddenly change their processes in order to be able to work with the very latest technologies. Indeed, they're not interested in innovation historically. The reason that they've not been interested in innovation is because innovation means risk. Each time they change a component, it brings an element of risk to the satellite that they're producing. So because they are risk averse, they've become innovation averse. And that's meant that there's been limited innovation in terms of particularly around cost. So who's the end customer for most of these large satellites? It's the government, it's the military, who are not cost sensitive. They are sensitive to make sure that those satellites work for a 10 or 15-year period, and therefore cost does not really come into the equation. So what's changed now is that there's a whole bunch of entrepreneurs that have seen a massive opportunity in space, that are putting together these amazing tiny satellites that are the size of a shoebox or the size of a washing machine, and they're competing head-on with the manufacturers of these large satellites. And this has created a whole disruption in the market that, as a venture capitalist, we're focused on trying to make money from. So you'll all recognize the images of these three individuals, and they have really had a huge impact on this market over recent years. All of them self-made billionaires, all of them using their own wealth that they've accumulated to focus exclusively on the space market. Why are they doing that? Jeff Bezos, for example, the world's richest man, only this quarter invested 1% of his wealth into his space company. So what does he know? Why is the richest man in the world putting his own personal resources into this area? Well, as you all know, these guys have all been focused on the same thing, which is around launch and making that more efficient. But why is that necessary? So launch is the big problem. So for the same reasons that I talked about, that we haven't seen innovation within the satellite industry, the same is true of launch. Every time you introduce a new component to a rocket, it increases the risk that that rocket won't work. And as a result, innovation within the launch market has been limited for 20 plus years. People would prefer the reliability of a rocket working rather than it costing marginally less until now. So there are 27 players in the launch market. They've got a great success of successful launch, 92%. And there's a massive amount of capacity. These rockets have been launched, been created in order to be able to launch government and military satellites, the traditional satellites that are up to tons in weight. But the problem is that that no longer suits today's market, where these satellites are increasingly smaller. So we've got a mismatch between the size and cost of the rockets that are available in the market and the customers that now want to use that. And this is creating a bottleneck in the market that the billionaire investors have sought to address. So you can't pick up a newspaper without reading about SpaceX, and they have already changed the market. One of the things that Jeff Bezos says with his company, Blue Origin, he says, if you were to take your family on holiday to America on a jumbo jet, and if after you arrived they threw away that jumbo jet, it would be an expensive holiday. The airline industry has operated on being able to reuse those craft over and over again safely. And this is really their aim, their collective aim for the launch industry. And that's really already started to occur. The pictures you can see here are actually 2 of the 3 thrusters returning to Earth. So those aren't rockets that are going up. These are rockets that are actually coming down so that they're reusable. And if you look carefully at the picture, you can see that they're all sooty and burned. That's because they've been used in the past. So what's already occurred is that the costs of launch per kilo have tumbled. So it's now possible to through SpaceX, in order to be able to get a kilo of weight into space for $1,200. And I recently spoke to one of the directors of SpaceX, and he told me, he shared with me, that their view is that they want to get that below $100. So the cost of sending something into space is set on a path that's going to be the same cost as sending something to a different country on a different continent. And this is really what the game changer that we're facing now. Okay. Oh, I've gone on 2 minutes. Excuse me. Right, let's see. Okay. So the economics of space have absolutely changed in the last handful of years. In fact, everything's turned on its head. The cost has been tumbling. The time to market has been tumbling. The actual product itself is moving from hardware to software, and from bespoke to modular. And this means essentially that rather than space being the preserve of huge companies and governments, it's now open to any entrepreneur to enter this market, and that's really lowered the playing field, or leveled the playing field, and brought a lot of new players into the market. So one of the key things that's really happened is a recognition that craft in space don't need to last for a 15-year period. It's fine to have satellites that are replaced every 3 or 5 years, and this enables you to be able to have satellite constellations that have the very latest technology at any one particular point in time. So a disposable culture in space. So this has brought a whole range of venture investors like myself to this market. There are billions to be made over the next handfuls of years in this market, and venture capitalists like myself are always looking for these long-term growth areas where there is clear disruption and there's a large addressable market. So more money is being invested in this market in the last couple of years than ever before. And this is a trend that is rapidly accelerating. So just to provide a little bit more detail on that, so this chart shows the figures for 2017 and 2018 for global venture investment in space tech. And the figure to the third quarter of 2019 is $4.4 billion. So you can see that there is a massive amount of growth going on in terms of investors' appetite for this market. So where's all that money going to? You can see here quite clearly that most of the money is going to launch. Now, this isn't all the money that's all going into SpaceX, although SpaceX is included in that. This is going into a much broader range of launch companies. There's more than 120 launch companies that have been financed over recent years. So the bottleneck that we have at the moment in terms of the capacity and cadence of getting into space is going to be addressed over the course of the next few years. One could argue we could even end in a position of oversupply. So what's the next stage of investment? What we've called collect here is around building the platforms, the constellations in space that collect and disseminate this data. And over a period of time, our expectation is that the bulk of the money will move to the right. So the other areas identified there are downlink, which is around getting these huge amounts of data back down to ground securely, so it includes cybersecurity. And the data and insights need to be down in real time. They need to be crunched, analyzed, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and that moves into the analysis section. Being able to take massive quantities of unstructured data, fuse it with terrestrial data, to produce products that are relevant to a very broad range of end markets, from finance and insurance through to agriculture, right the way through virtually every sector you can think of, oil and gas and mining, retail, construction. Every one of these markets has a requirement of some sort for data that can be born from above. And our view and our thesis is that that the closer to real time that data is, the more value that data is to the end markets. So it's easy to assume, particularly about all of the press that SpaceX gets, that all of this exciting stuff has already happened, and that the world has already changed, and that the cost of accessing space has already fallen. But I love this chart because it really shows where we are right now. The one that the chart that I want to really draw to your attention are all the blue lines at the bottom there, with a small amount of orange lines to explain. So I think it goes from, I can't quite see the number at the end, but it's sort of the 1950s through to 2018, and this is the number of rocket launches per year over that period of time. So the first thing that you note is that today we're not launching as many rockets as we were in the 50s, 60s, 70s, which I think is quite incredible. Before I saw this chart, I thought that today we'd be launching many, many more. But the thing that really sticks out for me is the orange part of these. And I'm sorry for those at the back on the resolution of this, but the orange are the actual commercial launches. So the blue on the cost and be a real enabler for all of the things that I want to invest into through my firm, but also all of the ambitions that the Asgardia community has. So that's some scene setting about the market. I'm now going to tell you a little bit more about what we do. So I mentioned that there were three drivers of change in this market. One is the first one was the lower cost of satellites, and explain why that's happening. The next was the lower cost of launch, and I explained why that's happening. But the third thing that's really going to drive this market is the fact that the cloud. The cloud, you can access GPUs at any stage company. So if you are a startup that needs to crunch a massive amount of data, historically you'd have had to have bought a supercomputer that filled a room that cost you millions. It was a real issue to being able to analyze data. But now, thanks to the cloud, this kind of capability is available at ultra low cost to anybody that wants to access it, along with the storage. So this is the third element that brings everything together right now, that makes space such an exciting market to profit from. So the kind of things that we're interested in is around using artificial intelligence to extract features, to identify change, and to use that to make forecasts. So, for example, one of the areas that we're interested in is building a giant satellite constellation in order to be able to see every spot on Earth every few minutes, so that you're able to, at any point, to be able to determine what happened 2 minutes ago, what happened an hour ago, what happened a day ago, what happened a week ago, a month ago, a year ago, and use that information to determine what might happen in the future. Simple things like car counting in car parks to work out what the profits of Walmart are going to be are sort of really easy things that you can use to profit. But there are many other things around security and many other applications across virtually any vertical you can think about, where we believe there are billion-dollar opportunities to use this type of information, and that's where we're focused. So a little bit more about our organization and what we're focused on. So the left-hand side, first of all, so we're interested in data from above. Now, we're actually interested in the data that's created and how that's applied to the end market and how you make money out of that. So as a result, the end customer is not particularly interested where that data comes from. They're interested in the insights. So as a result, we are focused on all forms of data from above: satellites, high-altitude platforms, and drones They're all gathering the same kind of information. They're all using similar platforms. The platforms are remarkably similar in terms of their electronics, their sensor technology, their battery technology, and the end customer market. So when we talk about space tech, we include these different areas within our definition because ultimately they're all doing the same thing. So that's part one. Part two is my own organisation. So we see in the region of around 100 investment opportunities from around the world per month. So that's about 70 or 80% of the global market for venture in space tech. And we have three parts to our organisation. The main part is the Space Fund, where we'll write checks for $1 to $5 million in exciting A-series stage companies. So this is not seed, it's the round after seed, where we'll buy a stake in the business, we'll join the board, we'll help those companies grow, and then ultimately we look to sell those companies to make a return to our investors. The other thing that we have is a Space Camp Accelerator. So this takes a much broader number of companies into a 3-month program and supports those companies to meet with customers to validate their technology, to identify whether the functions and features are what the market are looking for, to determine what the appropriate pricing is, and so on. And through a 3-month program, they validate their technology, and we validate whether we like them as a management team, whether we think they're a good proposition, and whether they're viable to invest into. So effectively, this is a programmatic due diligence exercise for us. And then we also have a group which are called Space Tech Angels. So these are high net worth individuals, many coming from the space industry that have had a career as an executive in the space industry. They recognize that their industry is being disrupted, and they want to try and profit from that because they understand this market, they understand the areas that they focus. So this is the other, probably the most important part of our organisation. So on the left-hand side there are the names of some of the biggest companies in space. And many of those are investors in our funds or partners in our accelerators. So their businesses are being disrupted by the new innovations that we've been talking about. And it's very difficult for these large organizations to actually have any visibility on these technologies that are coming in and are addressing their markets. So they've invested into our fund to provide them with a horizon scanning, a window of ability to be able to witness these companies, potentially to be able to co-invest with them, more importantly, to be able to become a customer or a partner, and very importantly, to have visibility on being able to acquire these companies before they get so large that rather than acquiring them, they get acquired by them. So this is a self-preservation investment from these organizations. And then we also include the space agencies and military organizations like the MOD in the UK. So that's so these parties, we provide them with a service of them understanding through us what's going on globally within this market. They provide us with a service being on our call when we want to do some due diligence around an investment that we're making. So between these organizations, they have more than 1 million employees, all of them very highly skilled, all of them expert within their particular niche. We're able to call upon these individuals when we find an interesting technology and ask them what we think about it. We're able to go to 4 or 5 or 6 individuals across a broad range of different companies and ask them what they think. And if they're really excited about this area and they think it's great, then we spend a bit more time on it. And if they tell us it's not very interesting, we question them, because one of the biggest problems is not invented here. So these engineers in these organizations, well, their first response is often, this will never work, it's no good, we've tried it before. So we can't take the first answer that we get from these guys. We have to go back and we have to question them, because we're really trying to break this sort of not invented here issue. So my team consists of 8 people. I'm the founder of the organization, but 3 of our partners have themselves built billion-dollar businesses in this market. So I thought I'd highlight them to you. So Matt O'Connell was the founder of GeoEye, an Earth observation business that took pictures of the ground that was sold for $1.3 billion to Digital Globe He then became the CEO of the largest startup in the space market, OneWeb, that's looking to put 1,000 satellites into orbit to create a broadband for all of the world. So he's our partner based in New York. Our partner based in Silicon Valley is Michael Jones. So Michael founded a company called Keyhole Corporation that is a graphics business. His background's in the gaming industry. That was acquired by Google in 2003, and they renamed it Google Earth. And he was the CTO of Google Earth and Google Map and Google Local, and was effectively the CTO at Google up until a handful of years ago. And then Candace Johnson is our Luxembourg-based partner. She's the founder of the largest space company in Europe, SES, that provides all of our television and media services and SATCOMs. So using the knowledge of our industry partners, using the entrepreneurial experience of my partners, and the fact that this industry is going through a significant disruption, we believe we're in a good place to be able to spot some of the emerging leaders within the different subsectors of the overall space tech market. So during recent years, we have built a portfolio of 50 companies. So we are the most active investor in space tech globally, 2 or 3-fold bigger than the next nearest. And I've highlighted some of the companies here. And on my next slide, I'll just give you a little bit of a flavor of some of the type of things that we've invested into. So change detection. So I've already mentioned this, so I'll start there. So we've invested into a Finnish company called ICEYE. They've developed a miniaturized synthetic aperture radar, a SAR radar. And this is on a satellite. And what it enables is it's a technology that's traditionally used by the military and government. And it's used because rather than using a camera-based technology that looks down at the ground, the problem with the camera-based technology is that it doesn't work in nighttime, and if it's a cloudy day, guess what? You can't see the ground. Whereas SAR is a radar, and therefore it operates at nighttime, it operates through clouds, and these grainy grey images that you can see there are therefore 100% reliable, that you can see any spot on Earth at any point that you want to, which means that it's a reliable visual way of seeing the ground. So this image is from one of the satellites, one of the 5 satellites that ICEYE has launched, and it's a 50 centimeter resolution. Their satellites are about 200th of the cost of the next nearest SAR satellite, and these guys are in the process of putting up a large constellation that will provide near real-time visibility globally. And we're interested in the data analytics from the data that comes from this and of all of the applications that can be applied to. Another one of our companies, Weather, is called Spire Global. So Weather is really formed in the oceans. Governments have spent hundreds of millions of dollars building their own satellite infrastructure in order to be able to access this data. Governments around the world share this data together so that they can share their fleet of satellites. And the fleet of government satellites is 20 satellites that collect weather data. And this company already has 100 satellites in orbit, so they've got 5 times more than all of the governments in the world added together, and they're using the very latest technology to get the most richest data they can. So their weather forecasts are already at the 5-day more accurate than any government weather forecast at 3-day. And they're going to put up another 50 satellites during the course of this year. And once they've achieved that, they will be able to, they believe, provide a weather forecast on every single measure at a 50% improvement. So one final example I'll give you is around agriculture. We've invested into an Israeli company called Planet Watchers. Again, they use SAR data to look at the ground, to do things like identifying soil moisture. So they'll identify a field, and they'll identify within that field which parts of that field need to be watered. So the farmer only uses a fraction of the water to water that field, but it has a whole range of knock-on consequences in terms of only using a small amount of water, but also not washing off the pesticide that they've put over that particular crop, which then leaks into the soil and causes other problems. So it's around the efficiency of resources that this kind of technology is a big enabler of. So those are just some of the examples of the types of businesses that we've invested into today. So there's been a massive amount of investment into space, and investors are always pushing the envelope, looking for the next thing. You know, we're prepared to take risk. We recognize that more than half of the things that we invest into are going to fail. We embrace failure because taking a portfolio approach, we know that if we do things right, we're going to have some successes and they'll make up for the failures. And this enables us to be able to really push things forward a lot quicker than a government is likely to want to do because of our appetite for risk. So confidence is growing, but sometimes that confidence is misplaced. So a whole range of pioneering companies, particularly around space mining, have already hit the wall. So the venture community can take this in our stride. These are highly ambitious projects. The capital return was many years away, and they haven't worked. That hasn't reduced the appetite of venture investors, but governments who've been involved with this have already started to have sort of second thoughts. So, for example, the Luxembourg government has made some big investments in this area. So, however, there are some nearer term profit opportunities that are in orbit that we're excited about. In fact, we've invested in 2 of these 4 examples. First one there in the top left quadrant is Spacebelt. So this is a company that's just raised $100 million seed money, and they're putting up a constellation of satellites in orbit as a data center. So the data center is in orbit. So it doesn't need to have any of the cooling and energy issues because it can use the energy of the sun, it can use the cooling of space. And it's right where it needs to be in order to be able to collect all of this huge amounts of data that's being generated from all of the other satellites. So we see that as a surefire winner, but also we think it's also going to be the first steps of data centers into space. It just makes sense from a whole range of reasons for those to be in that area. The next one to the top right of the quadrant is our company Leo Labs. So this uses ground-based radar in order to be able to look up into space, to be able to identify debris, and to be able to monitor satellites. It sounds like something that you would expect exists today, but it doesn't, amazingly so. The US Air Force has radars that it uses for its own purposes to monitor what's going on in space. And if a piece of debris they consider is going to have a collision with a Chinese or Russian or any commercial satellite, they will send them an email or pick up the phone and let them know with a few days' notice. But the tolerance of the area that is at risk is really very large, and in many cases too large for these satellites to be able to actually move out the way. So Leo Labs have a range of ground-based radars which are just much higher resolution, and that means that they're able to see debris down to 2 centimeters. The error of the conjunction is much lower, measured in tens of meters rather than half kilometers. And we really believe that's going to be sort of foundational for regulators and insurers and operators to be able to have this data set. But this is all done using the latest technology. So the US government has just refreshed its ground-based radars at more than $1 billion each. And our company produces radars with a similar capability, but a fraction of that price, which means that we can build a very significant ground-based infrastructure and provide much more resolution and a much more commercial service. And as you know, we've got single operators such as Amazon that are looking to put up 3,300 satellites. The number of satellites that are going to be in orbit is exponentially increasing, and therefore there is a requirement to have these kind of in-orbit activities. So the other two are Astroscale. So Astroscale is a great example of the investment community growing in confidence. So this is a business that's solely focused on in-orbit servicing. There's still some years away, so that demonstrates to me that there's a massive amount of belief. And these guys have a space taxi. And this is a rocket that goes inside a rocket, a big rocket like SpaceX. That means they're able to take advantage of this $1,000 per kilo pricing. But within their own rocket, they sell that space to small satellite operators. And then once they're launched from in orbit from SpaceX, their rocket then will go around the planet and it will deliver its cargo into the slots that they want. So their end customers are happy. Now that satellites have a lifespan of 3 or 4 years, you can't take up to 6 months in order to be able to move your satellite into position. So this kind of activity is really of interest. What I think is really exceptional about deorbit, and the truth is in the name, is that that's just the first part of their business model. The second part of their business model is around using that empty rocket to do in-space services. So taking one satellite from one area to another to be able to help an operator manage its constellation, or taking a defunct satellite and grabbing it and taking it back to Earth to burn up in the atmosphere, so deorbit. So there's a growing area for this kind of activity, but this company is going to be operating on a good commercial basis because they effectively haven't paid to get their vehicle into space. So I think some of these examples that I've given here are examples of how the market is moving in terms of investor appetite to invest in the type of things that are relevant to Asgardia. So I love this strap line. I think it's fabulous, paving the road to living in space. I mean, that's a big impact, a bold ambition. I've added an extra tagline there myself, so I hope the organisers don't mind. But I think that these two things are hand in hand. So I think we all know that in all of these areas, over the last decades, we've been doing our very best to use the resource and to not replenish it in any effective way. We believe that space is the answer to many of these problems. And moving dirty industries off-world to preserve our own resources, I believe, is something that not only we need to do, it's something that we must do. And space is an enabler, and actually the real enabler is the lowering cost of launch. That means that these things are now, and only now, open to investors to be able to finance. So there's some examples there. Space energy, giant solar farms in space are now potential to become a reality. And things like manufacturing in space, taking the dirtiest of the industries first of all, and moving them into an area that won't harm the planet. So that's an exciting area. And now that the cost of space of access has come down, we need the cadence and volume of capacity to grow. That's already been financed and will come on stream over the course of the next few years. And so we're going to see a huge amount of change in this area. Again, I think this is very relevant to the ambitions of Asgardia. So this is my final slide, and I've drawn this from the Wayfounder Foundation because I thought it was just really relevant for today, which is what needs to be done to achieve the ambitions of Asgardia. So this is around lunar settlement, but I think that it's representative of what we've been talking about: biological support, communications, habitation, lunar environment, energy, and then navigation. And many of the things that you can see listed here we were talking about yesterday, the human risk of long-term low gravity. And then there are a whole range of areas on this that are still not in the realms of something that a venture capitalist like me would support, because I need to be able to have confidence that I can make a return within the life of my fund. And this is why I think that this is an exciting place for Asgardia to finance the type of technologies that are required where there isn't necessarily a return within the next 5 years or so. And that's the type of return that I need in order to make investments. But Asgardia, being a longer-term focus, doesn't. So things like oxygen recycling, I can invest into those kind of things right now because there are clearly terrestrial-based applications for that type of technology. In fact, it's hard to believe that it doesn't already exist today. I'm sure the technologies do. It just needs to be conditioned for this particular market. But things like the low gravity and other things on this list are still further out there. And I think these are the things that Asgardia needs to focus on, not the things that can be focused on by venture capitalists like myself that are naturally going to want to invest in these areas because there are near-term returns. It's the much harder things that Asgardia should be focusing resources on, because the governments, as we heard many times yesterday, they've kind of lost their appetite for putting the money into doing these type of things. And actually, when they do them, they have to do them to such a high degree of success that they end up costing 10 or 100 times more than the private sector can do it itself by taking some risks and just accepting that there's going to be failure along the way. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you all for listening. I look forward to the Q&A.
So now we are coming to the part of the round table. So I please the presenters, so Mark and Marcus, on stage. Very good. Very good. I think that works. Thank you so much. Great. Thank you, gentlemen. Really exciting presentations. Really have to say it was very impressive, also the data you showed. I would like to maybe jump into the round table by a little bit of a critical question, or let's say going back to one of your nice slides that you have showed. I think it was the third last. It was showing the potential in space for finding solution for Earth problems, current problems, and also, let's say, problems which are coming in future with the, let's say, 7-8 billion inhabitants of in the world. So do you see that such programs are investable at all?
Yes, well, I think I've hopefully painted a picture that there is now a growing appetite from investors to support this kind of thing. But those opportunities that can not only forecast, but do so on a way that intuitively investors believe that there is a genuine return of capital. Those are the opportunities that will be addressed first of all, because those that are leading the charge here are doing so in order to be able to make a profit, and we're prepared to take risks, but the profit motive needs to be very clear, and it needs to be a profit-led company. It's not a science-led company. Science-led companies find it very, very difficult to raise any money.
Yeah, clear. Something from your side on this?
I think that following our meetings yesterday with Lena and Igor, it's clear that they have a plan in which they want to raise the money over this period of time in order to facilitate this. So, yes, it's possible. Yes, we're going to have to look at bringing the 6 continents together and having that a really strong corporate governance over the fundraising, the projects that they're planning, keeping ahead of the science that is needed. But it is pulling all of those bridges together, putting bridges in place so that the whole operation will actually come together and be functional.
Mm-hmm. Let me shortly introduce a little bit about us and our, let's say, the company Space Cargo Limited. I said this earlier, and I do not have prepared a presentation on this, for good reasons. But I would like to inform you a bit about what is the target over here. Space Cargo Unlimited is a company which is, let's say, mainly believing in that space is bringing an asset for ground applications. So Space Cargo Unlimited has the duty to provide access to space. It's not that easy. You would say that's super easy. It's SpaceX, there's the Russians, there's a lot of people you can simply go, especially if you need something in return. Yeah, you believe it's super easy. I think we at the beginning have been in negotiation with SpaceX on a mission for about more than 2 years, and I remember one of the first negotiations was really simply on the performance of Dragon 1, and they said, yeah, you know, the internet, isn't it saying a lot? So it was their own webpage really claiming that it's going for a year mission and things like this, so it wasn't like that. So we just found out that we recently need to have, we need to open this segment first of all. And why? This is where we have a 100% subsidiary. And this 100% subsidiary is a space biotech company. And the space biotech company is investing, I would love to say private money, because I do not want to use the term commercial, because it's very often used. It's maybe not always correctly used, I would say. So we are using private money funding into missions, creating assets in space, returning it to ground, have an IPO that we are selling or goods that we are selling. So we are really, let's say what others tend to, or let's say claiming sometimes, we are really doing it, and we have now missions on NG12 is one of our first missions that we're going to do, and it's our target to have about and operating roughly 30 tons of payload until 2030, which is a huge amount of investment, as you can imagine, and this is really private funded. From this position, when we came and said, this is what we're going to do, everybody said, oh God, not fundable. You cannot do that. And so what I would like to talk with you guys about is a little bit finding the bridge, because there's an end target, which you see there's a potential, and this is not a market yet, but it will become a market in future, and you need to find a bridge to go there. What do you say are, let's say, typical mechanisms and how to go along such path?
Yeah. So, congratulations on your business. That sounds very exciting. In terms of the bridge, what is really required is there's a massive amount of capital that's really interested in this market, and what we see is sort of organisations like your own are speaking to investors. They are getting investor interest, but these investors are what we term followers. So they're prepared to invest if somebody who understands the sector is going to invest a significant proportion of the project. And that gives them the confidence that a specialist in the know is prepared to take the same risks, and therefore they will support it. So what I think, rather than a bridge, I think what's required in the market are more lead investors that have conviction in organisations like yours. They really understand what the technical risks are, what the profile for the returns are, and they're prepared to support that. So in markets like I described, where there is a relatively near-term profit opportunity. I think the venture community are already there and acting as the lead. And again, I think this is one of the opportunities for an organisation like Asgardia, if they are able to build this war chest that Marcus has been talking about, they will be able to take the lead role in some more of these ambitious sort of science-led opportunities. And then the other investors, in recognising the expertise of that Asgardia fund, would follow them and support that funding. So I think this is one of the really interesting things about this community, that effectively they're acting a bit like a government, where they're talking about taxing their citizens and behaving a bit like a space agency. But they're going to be doing things that are focused more on the areas, as identified in my list, those areas that are going to remove some of the hurdles for living in space.
Yeah. Transferring this a little bit into, let's say, your new topic now that you're going to do, making, let's say, Asgardia really a brand. Let's say this is still, of course, there's still some quite long path to go. So what elements do you see? What is required to make it from, let's say, from a potential to, let's say, to the real brand at the end?
Well, when you look at the presentation that we've just had about satellites and cargo and the investment that is currently being undertaken, it's a great eye-opener as to the progress that we've made over the last 10 years, I would suggest, and that is 5 years, and that it is just gathering momentum. You can see from your one slide when you were saying over the last sort of 2017, 18, 19, how it has increased. So I think when you look at the development and the work that's going on, again, if you project that forward, and it would be interesting. I mean, you know, you have so many different projects that are going on. I think that, you know, that is of huge interest, and there's going to be such a changing market over the next 10 years. I think from Asgardia's point of view, you know, they're going to have to, you know, to monitor this. I think that, you know, again, in terms of this fundraising, the corporate governance has to be set out, and the financial security has to be in place. You know, it is of absolute paramount importance that, you know, simple things like the global banking is addressed, because you know, they're talking about the digital currency, the new currency that they want to create, which you know, is we discussed yesterday with Igor. It is, you know, it's a huge undertaking. It is a huge undertaking. But if you were setting up a business in a geographical location, whether it be in a continent in the US or in the UK or in Europe, you know, you have your financial restrictions. You've got regulatory issues that you have to compete with. You know, Asgardia is looking at a global business that effectively they're setting up, and that in its own right they're going straight to E. They're going A to E and missing out B, C, and D. They're going, we're not going to go regional, we're going to go global immediately. And that's one of the things that I would suggest in 2020, 21, 22, up until 25, we'll need a significant amount of work to ensure that if you've got those basic fundamentals in place, the company can operate.
And this is, of course, a question of a lot of funding. So do you also consider low-hanging fruits or something, giving you some kind of, let's say, guarantee for the investors? Or?
Well, this is the interesting part, in that Igor has the fundraising model in place. However, in any expeditions that have taken place over, you know, the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, last week I was at a meeting, and Ranulph Fiennes, who is a living explorer, gave a talk, and he was 7 years in the making of an expedition that he did around the Earth, but instead of sort of going this way, they went sort of north to south, over the ice caps, over the polar ice caps. But he had to go to multinational companies to raise funds in order to facilitate the expedition. And it was very, very interesting to see what his model was then as opposed to what the model is now. But what it tells you is that industry and multinational companies will want to be involved. We can go and tell them our story. We have an objective to make this a household name over set periods of time globally on the 6 continents. And in terms of doing that, we then, it is a changing market. So we will have to look at low-hanging fruit initially in terms of to be able to facilitate the work that needs to be done to set up the global company.
I would like to open the floor for some questions, please, over there.
Thank you very much. My name is Ben. I want to ask you a question by way of an example. And you are 100% correct. Asgardia is not a company which is going to make profit and then sell itself off so that its investors can make a profit off that. And that way we operate more like a government. And that's contradictory to what you've just said. Your requirements are to look at an investment. And it's natural. But my question to you would be something like this. I've got 150 million people that need to communicate with each other, irrespective of where they are, on the Earth, on the Moon, in a spaceship, whatever. You've already got a company called OneWeb, which is capable of delivering that to us. But between them and us, we will need investors to actually make this a broadly available technology. And in the process of creating that broadly available technology, we also create the environment where new startup tech investment can take place, which would then be in your area of expertise where you would maybe be interested in investing, because those would create companies which are profitable, which you can sell on. So how do you advise us to look at creating this fund or this investment environment for a longer term, less profit, less risky, a return to people that want to help fund us create this broad implementation of technologies and not just creating new technologies and selling them off for a profit?
Yeah, so I'm focused on making a profit and looking back at Earth, whereas Asgardia is not focused on making profit and looking out at space. So that's the distinction, and that's why I'm here today, because I'm interested in that, but my focus is on making a return. From the Asgardia perspective, you're building a global community. You're building a country, effectively, and you will behave like a government. You will tax your citizens. You will focus those resources on areas that you believe are important to the growth of Asgardia. And as I just mentioned, by taking a position to lead on particular projects, and by financing the lion's share of that particular project, I believe that would bring in other investors that have the same interests. So that might be governments around the world that themselves don't have any space capacity, but believe in in the Asgardia approach. Likewise with individuals and corporates that are aligned with the vision of Asgardia. So I think that the profit motive is the thing that's brought investors to the table, but Asgardia needs to do things in a different way, which is more aligned with traditional governments.
If I approach OneWeb and I say, I need 150 million stations to connect people, they're going to say, we won't do this because we don't have the funds to create that without you investing heavily into the manufacturing process with us.
Yeah, you're not going to be able to go to any corporate profit-driven organisation and just ask them for a handout. They're going to say no. Asgardia needs to find a way to work with those type of organisations. But I mean, these things are going to happen anyway. There's massive investment from OneWeb, there's massive investment from SpaceX, there's a massive investment from Amazon. Each of them have got ambitions to build a global internet that's going to serve the 50% of the world that currently don't have access to those communications. So with three very well-funded organisations that are already doing this, you know, I don't think that that's something that you particularly need to focus on.
No, we don't want to create the tech. We want to implement the tech within our environment. So I want to bring in 150 million new customers, you know. But we need to be able to also create a fund where people can invest into Asgardia and say, I see where these guys are going. They're going to connect 150 million people, but I want to present a service on top of that connection. So I'm saying to them, by all means, if you start funding us to do this, I give you access to providing your services on top of that. So is that something that's completely outside your areas of interest, or would you consider looking at something like that into the future?
Let's take this offline.
That was my question, and thank you for that.
Nevertheless, I think it's a very important point here, and I believe we have this very often in other fields as well. I believe maybe it's a share, you know, saying that infrastructure is something that should, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, infrastructure should be supported mainly by government. But it's like building the roads, right? They shall not do the trucks on it. Yeah, that's something I'd say. This is private. But you need to have a certain infrastructure at the beginning, and it does not work like this without it. And then I believe, let's say, and I have about, let's say, 17 years of microgravity. I was heading the life science department at Airbus, so I have a bit an insight from here. I believe they have done a lot in how operating the trucks, how does the driver has to look like, and so on. How all these models are. But not so much focusing on just, let's say, doing mainly the streets, taking care that everything is there, and then leave it to the market openly to organize themselves in let's say, in a profitable way. That has not so much done in the past. I believe there is a kind of a mindset change. There is something going on. We sense this. But of course, on the other hand, we also see that let's say, the government money is shrinking.
Well, I think the governments are quite happy to provide infrastructure in their own country. But what we're talking about here is global.
It's
so
global,
it's
yeah.
a lot
You're
more difficult for them to be able to use their citizens' money in order to be able to do something that is global. And that's where the problem lies. Now, space has long been a very cooperative area where, you know, all nations are working together and have done so peacefully for many years. So there's a good backdrop of collaboration. But I think that's why an organisation like Asgardia exists, to be able to bring together citizens that do have an interest in this global approach and focus the resource on where it's getting the most value. So I agree with what you're saying about you know, doing this infrastructure for your citizens. But I think it's going to take a whole new way of thinking about how they're actually applied.
One more question over here, and then we come to you, of course.
Can you give us some idea about how Asgardia or space developments technologies emerging may be able to help in the future with reducing, I don't know, the climate emissions or the biodiversity crisis? Can you give us some practical examples of how Asgardia could be of use, or how new emerging space technologies may be of great use?
I think that when you look at Asgardia's objective, there are many ways of interpreting that, but certainly in a sort of a crude sense, there is one of their objectives is there is no plan B. So if anything happens to the Earth, what they're starting to develop is a plan that they may execute over the next 10, 20, 30 years in order to relocate. And I think from that point of view, That is one of their objectives. But how would that then enable further addressing further climate change? I think that's a current affair that is taking place anyway. I think that there is more, you can see what's going on in the world currently. So one of the areas that we look at in investments at the moment, which is coming back into vogue, is sustainable investing. In the early noughties, there was a lot of work that was being done on solar, in renewables, so wind, hydro, anaerobic digestion. And a lot of the companies, from an investment point of view, we tried to look at using the ethical tag, the renewables, in terms for as an asset class that clients could make money for. And it was a little bit, it lagged a little bit. It didn't have momentum. It went out of vogue, but it is definitely coming back into vogue. But then when you look at how the technology has developed, so from early noughties, when you're looking at telephones, for example, or you're looking at batteries, or you're looking at solar and storage and wind and everything else, it is certainly a different climate, a different market now. So I think that whole sector has got momentum and will have momentum, and it is being brought to the fore. So there will be, we are more conscious of ways in which we live, and I think that what is these days second nature wasn't 20 years ago in terms of recycling, but now we have a problem with over recycling. So we, there are. I think this is something that will continue at least until 2025, 2030. We've got to look at areas like China that are opening up more power stations, coal power stations and areas like that. Because on one hand you can sort of say, well, we can look at this side of it, but on the other hand, when they're saying, well, we're going to do whatever we like anyway. So that is so. But we are in this period of evolution in terms of climate change, and I think absolutely you're right. It has to be a high consideration.
So if I could just chime in there, I think that Asgardia is not particularly focused on climate change and conservation. I think what their strapline is preparing to live in space, and we've got a major problem on Earth of the growth of population. By 2050, in order to support the population that we'll have, we need to have the equivalent of 3 different worlds of resource, which of course we won't have because there's only one planet. So I think that the Asgardia approach to finding solutions to living off the planet, a byproduct of that will be supporting the sort of climate, reducing the issues that we face today. But I think it's just a different way of solving the same problem. But it's a harder way of doing it, and but it's aligned with the big ambitions of some of the billionaires that we talked about. The Elon Musk, the Jeff Bezos, all of them have got a big vision about living off the planet. They're approaching it in a different way. They're putting their billions into creating the infrastructure and the rocket capability to be able to get there, whereas what I'm interested in Asgardia about is that they're creating a community that wants to be part of that, and the first people and community that wants to be involved with taking the advantage of and the risks associated with living off the planet. And the byproduct is less resource required by Earth. So I think the investment in climate and things like that are left to people like me, that we want to do things that are going to have an impact on the planet, but we still want to make some money doing it. And I think we can comfortably do that. I believe that the Asgardia focus is elsewhere.
Nevertheless, of course, they can support, and I just can give you an example. We are flying next year an experiment on ISS, where we believe we can have an impact on agriculture, the way how we are, let's say, preparing, how we prepare plants in a natural way, because we are not intending to do any gene manipulation or so. We are looking at how such mechanisms adapt to a different environment. We want to learn from it. We want to use it. And this is not fundable. There was no one saying, okay, you know what, I put some money on the table for it. So what we're going to do really is we are selling luxury goods. We are doing some refining of luxury goods, and we are, let's say, offering, or we are attracting people on these luxury goods. We are not even selling them, but we are offering, let's say, participating also to the mission, getting wealthy people on board, and this allows us to do that. So what can Asgardia do for us is love us, give us some kind of credibility, support us, and say, that makes sense. You know, saying these guys, what they're going to do here, it's a hard job really to get funding for what they're going to do and for the return on Earth, but we are still behind, we're supporting it, even if we, of course, have a different agenda and saying, okay, but why leaving the planet just to, so you also may want to come back one day. Over here.
Hello, my name is Jacob Mulder, and you talked about a bridge, and maybe I can help you with a piece of that bridge. I'm not asking for money, by the way. I have a question though, but I don't really expect an answer, but I do want you all to think about it, about my question. I, among others, represent CGI. It's a large IT multinational, also quite active in space. And I need business plans to convince CGI to join Asgardia. CGI has real power to implement, and Asgardia needs commercial multinationals like CGI. So please think about that and contact me if you've got ideas. Thank you.
First of all, thank you very much, everybody, for participating in Roundtable. And Mark, thanks a lot. You did great presentation. I have one question to you. You explained about trends on the market, where investors, VC invested money. My question concerns more specific area concerning satellites industry, because everybody remember when satellite were extremely expensive. All government satellite was universal. They tried to make communication with weather channels, with everything in one satellite. Right now, with reducing price, of course, satellite will be more specific. It means satellites which working on weather, agriculture, and other areas. Who would be winner in this race? As investor, in what kind of satellite you prefer to invest money? I can explain you why I am asking this. Because a couple of months ago, I spoke with one CEO of hedge fund, and on the same question, he answered me, as usually, will winner finance business, finance area. Because right now, hedge fund already has satellites which analyzed Walmart parking, and based on parking spots occupied, compared with months, quarter, and 1 year ago, they can predict price on shares on Walmart, and as usually, finance will be the first. What is your opinion? What do you recommend to private investor in what kind of satellite invest money?
So I'm a technology investor, but the consideration of technology is right down on the list. So what's more important is, what's the addressable market that you're trying to invest into? Is it big enough? Is it real enough? Is it close enough? And who are the people that you're going to invest in order to be able to monetize that and make money of it? So when it comes to which satellite that you use, it's really a very secondary consideration. It's the satellite that's best suited to the particular task. So that might be the lowest cost because you want to provide the lowest cost service, or it might be the highest resolution because you want to provide the best quality pictures, or it might be the most timely because having the information every minute is what's important, and that takes a different type of satellite. So I don't think it's possible to sort of answer your question in terms of what's the best satellite. If you're looking for a sort of prediction about how this is going to go, I'm quite happy to have a stab at that, which is that I think that small satellites are going to start growing in size again, and that the tiny shoeboxes will demonstrate a good working prototype, but they'll build bigger satellites for resilience and to make it work. And that ultimately they will become an infrastructure players, maybe like CGI in space, that will effectively own the satellite platform, and that they'll cost effectively be able to add new capabilities in terms of sensors to them. So if I'm backing an entrepreneur that has an amazing new sensor that, for example, can see underground to be able to identify resources, rather than them having to go through the whole process of selecting a satellite, building it, launching it, and so on, they'll go to a service provider that basically owns satellite infrastructure, and they will then just host their payload and share part of the profits. So they'll be able to go from developing their technology to validating it on a single satellite to then maybe rolling it out onto 1,000 satellites in the space of a year. And that will enable the very best technology to get to market quickest, and that's how I think that the market's going. So in terms of what the satellite is, I don't think that matters.
I think
You invest in technology, not in the market.
I'm invested in the market rather than the technology. Yeah.
So I think we have over there one question, but we just have 2 minutes left or something. So
hi, my name is Daniel Shoemaker. It might be directed directly at Mr. Blaze, however. But I'm going to reference Mr. Boggett's presentation, ironically enough. So, but right now, the billions of dollars that are being invested in launch capabilities to bring it down, and then the money's probably going to move into those other sectors. Do you see Asgardia as entering the market as providing those goods and services to government and commercial customers, or utilizing what's already there to provide goods and services?
I don't think that is Asgardia's objective. I think that they're not looking to put payloads onto rockets to take them up to various other satellites and everything else. I don't think that that's in their mandate.
No, I mean in the other sectors, not launch, the other sectors, like building the infrastructure up in space to provide the services to governments, to customers.
Okay, so I suppose the simple answer is that Asgardia is currently made up of, it's going to be made up of 6 continents. It's going to have different sectors within the company itself, if you want to call it a company. That isn't really something that I could answer, because my focus is going to be on funds, raising funds, and sort of the international security of looking after that money, and then where it's distributed after that, it won't be under my remit. So what we're going to try and do is bring this, going back to what I said about corporate governance. It is absolutely paramount that we have the correct corporate governance in place, so that we can raise the money in the next 1, 2, 3, 5 years, so that then the other people can make those decisions as to where that money is allocated.
So I'm super German, So is it possible that you have to call this question later, or shall we do that? Yeah. Okay, you get a minute.
Okay.
Run.
I'll try to do my best. I'm an interpreter for Kirill Pletner. He's an editor-in-chief of the Aerospace Journal. So he's wondering, there is an engineering project on delivering payload to the moon and making it cheaper. So he's wondering what the next step would be for that person, the author of this project. And actually, the deal is that that person went to a national space agency, and basically he's still waiting on their answer and the actions to, he got a positive answer actually, but the bureaucratic machine is working against him. So can he hope to get this idea, to sell this idea to the investors instead of going with a national space agency? Thank you.
Well, that's sure not for me the question, are we?
Yeah. There are examples of this type of thing being invested already. I draw your attention to a Japanese company called iSpace, who recently raised $100 million from a broad range of Japanese corporates to achieve that objective. So I think it is possible. But it's a challenge. It's in order to bring investors, you need to be able to demonstrate the profit. And I looked at that iSpace opportunity myself, and it was. I found it difficult to buy into the sort of profit capability of that project. You needed to think over a longer time period than a traditional venture capitalist would look at. And I think this is probably the reason why this company was successfully funded by corporates, and a broad range of them from Japan, because I think that they can take a longer term approach to making a profit from that investment than an investor like I can take, that's investing money on behalf of other investors that expect a return within a certain period of time.
Absolute exciting session. Thank you so much. Mark, from your side also. Marcus was really great. We now have, I think, believe me, looking into the schedule, it's a coffee break, and please see my friend Jeff Member at the end with the next session. I think it's about manufacturing and industry. I think that's really a very exciting one, so enjoy your coffee. That's really good.
I want to thank you for erasing the line between science and fiction, because that's what you're doing. That's basically what you're doing. You're erasing the